So many people are abandoning traditional weight training and exercise principles, things that were once the backbone of fitness. More weight, feeling the burn, pushing to failure, prioritizing protein, ensuring enough sleep, and meticulously managing your calories. These methods are proven for body composition, but the landscape of training is evolving. For years, coaches like Charles Poliquin and Paul Chek have been saying there is more than just lifting and dieting to a proper routine. Breathwork, rest, managing your stress, training the best athletes in the world isn't as straightforward as just a bodybuilder's regimen. Take former Mr. Olympia competitors like Ben Pakulski, for example, who has been shifting toward more and more holistic and esoteric fitness approaches for years. Why this pivot, though? Is it merely adapting to aging? Or is it a realization that true fitness, real breakthroughs, lie in the holistic realm? Today we are diving deep with Taylor Seibel, a holistic performance coach from Arizona, and he's on a mission to blend these worlds. Today we're going to be asking questions like, what's really behind this shift among bodybuilders and powerlifters and the aesthetic bros that are getting more into these holistic practices? We're going to be exploring the mindset needed to excel as a trainer. We'll be dissecting the rep ranges that truly optimize muscle growth versus the ones people tend to actually enjoy. We're also going to be confronting some of the beliefs that he and I have personally held that we had to confront ourselves as a coach. But Taylor's insights also extend into interpreting bloodwork, the cognitive boost that you gain from nootropics, and his shocking but probably correct theory on psychedelics altering health and exercise relationships. But the real game changer, how the intention behind your supplements can amplify their effectiveness. If this is your first time here, I make bi-weekly deep dives into fitness, nutrition, and wellness pop culture trends, as well as holistic bodybuilding and powerlifting content. So make sure to subscribe to hear some more of that. For today's Amazon gift card giveaway, put a comment saying what you have added into your routine that breaks from the norm. So with all that out of the way, guys, my name is Andrew with Holistic Motion. Let's get into it with Taylor Seibel. So whenever people hear holistic health, their mind seems to go to this like tree hugging hippie, or it's more like this, like well-rounded or, holistic idea of somebody who just has like a complete view on things. How do you personally define it?
Yeah, well, to be fair, that's why I also shifted toward holistic performance as well, because I think that it provides a little bit of a different connotation. Because, I think that is a thing that people think of. They're like, like people reach out to me all the time. Like, I'm into herbs or this thing or that thing. And I'm like, that's great. And so am I, kind of, like, if it makes sense, right? It's like ashwagandha. That's technically an herb. I use that for a specific reason and stuff like that. But I think that there's many different like pathways within the holistic realm. And the way that I view it personally is just looking at the whole picture of someone's biology and being able to make, decisions that point them in the right direction toward whatever outcome they want.
Like what, for example? What would be like a way that you're, I guess, doing an intake with someone to kind of figure out what's like your jumping off point for them?
Yeah. So, I always get on a call with somebody and just literally just talk to them, because I tend to be pretty intuitive in nature. So I'll kind of like just see how they're feeling, like energetically, if they even make sense to like work together, and we kind of vibe. And if we do, then I'll send them an intake form that's a little bit more detailed. We'll have like a symptoms assessment, and we'll kind of get into their goals and just really get into more of the details of like, okay, how can I actually help this person beyond just, what they've mentioned on this call? Because there's always going to be some disconnect between like what someone says to your face and what they're willing to type out in a form. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
go ahead. Sorry.
No. So I think that kind of process off the bat is super helpful, because, between talking to them and getting some input, typed out stuff or written out, then, it gives me a direction of at least, where to go and if I can help them. Right. And usually it's somewhere down the pathway of, they want to improve their fitness or like build some muscle, be more athletic or whatever, but they have like some limitation in the way. Like their gut health or their hormones are off, or like they're just super tired all day, every day, or whatever it is. And we're like, well, that's not really helpful. I'd like to have that in the way. because you can't live your life that you really want to live. And that's kind of why I shifted from holistic health to performance, because everybody was coming to me with goals that they want to get after they get healthy. It's like, well, like, why do you just want to be healthy? It seems kind of lame to just be healthy. It's like, what do you want to do with the health?
Right. Yeah, that is an interesting thing. Especially so like I'm a holistic health coach for, whatever that really means, kind of one of those nebulous, undefined terms, but you get what I'm saying. Did pretty detailed certification and it was cool and I loved it, blah, blah, blah. But in that space, it seems like a lot of people kind of have health and wellness as like their highest ideal. And it's interesting because on one hand, there's how old are you out of curiosity?
28.
28. Okay, so I'm 31. And it seems like when you and I were younger, and probably even generations before, like the top of the hierarchy was vanity and building muscle and getting strong. And I don't know what caused this. I don't know if it's has something to do with like social media, but it seems like a lot of people are starting to kind of shift into having some performance behind it. It's like, okay, I don't want to be all show, no go. I don't want to just look good and be strong. I also want to be healthy and injury free. And that seems to be showing up at people's kind of beginning point now, where people go into the gym and it's not just like, okay, I want to look good. It's also like, okay, I want to look good, but not at the expense of my function and not start developing pain and blah, 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 blah. What is it that you think's kind of started causing that for people, where they're starting to prioritize kind of that complete wellness behind everything?
Yeah, I think a lot of it probably has to do with social media, but I think even more so, I think that, psychedelics being more easily accessible and all that kind of stuff, I think makes a big difference, because it would be eerie for me to think that these are just like thoughts that humans are just like having. And like it seems like there's some kind of collective shift happening and people are just like awakening a little bit toward like, hey, maybe like other aspects of my life also matter. Maybe feeling fulfilled in my emotional life matters, or being able to move well without pain, or like all of these things. You're like, can I look good and feel good? That would be crazy, but I think especially if you dose up on some mushrooms or something and you have a different experience, like, wow, I did not realize this was possible. Like I thought I could only live like one type of life. I didn't realize it could be so complex and interwoven with other things.
Yeah. What was that shift like for you? Like I'm assuming you, much like most people, kind of started out in like the vanity and strength, et cetera, et cetera. Well, how did you personally get into that shift?
Yeah, so it was initially through mushrooms, and I think that
So kind of speaking from experience of that last bit.
yeah, no, and I think I've just had a lot of people that I've connected with, and maybe it's just I just attract those similar types of people or whatever, which there's obviously like that selection bias as well, but I think that the biggest thing that happened was one day I was in the sauna at the gym. And I remember my ex-girlfriend, one day she had told me, she's like, hey, like you should hang out with this guy. And I was like, well, that's weird. Like that you just send me a random picture of a guy and be like, you guys should be friends. Like, I'm not going to be his friend, obviously. Like that was just super awkward. And then I got in the sauna and I was like, oh, what do you know? It's that guy. I guess we're just
wow.
Like in the sauna sweating together. Like, what are we going to do? Just sit here awkwardly? And we started talking and he was like, hey, you're pretty cool. We should like hang out sometime. I was like, yeah, I could do that. And then like the day before we were supposed to hang out, he was like, so are you a connoisseur? I was like, is that your way of asking if I smoke weed?
Right.
Like, yeah. I was like, okay, yeah, I can smoke weed with you. That'd be cool. And then we smoked and we're just hanging out. I was like, this is actually pretty cool. I like this guy. And then he's like, hey, do you want to hang out, next week? And I was like, sure. He's like, well, do you know how to get mushrooms? I was like, well, I've never done them, but I think I know a guy that grows them. So like I asked him, and then I got the mushrooms, and we're just sitting. Like I came to his house, and there was a group of 4 other guys, and him, and then me. So 6 of us, and all but me and my friend Alex were the other 4 guys were all chiropractic students. So we're just sitting there talking, and they start like kind of adjusting each other. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Then they're like, no, we're going to wait on him. And they're talking about me. And I was like, well, this is interesting. I don't know what we're waiting for. And then they're like, we're going to wait till we get to the mansion. It's like, mansion? We're going to a mansion today? Okay. So we ended up like taking this trip down the street to this old like 200-year-old chiropractic mansion, because I grew up in the place where chiropractic was founded. So we got there, and basically we went on this like whole long like process of a journey. But we got to the point where like I was getting adjusted at the end, and he does this thing called network spinal. So it's
network chiropractic. I am familiar. Could you give an explanation for the people listening?
Yeah, it's more or less like a really nice blend between like a more artful form of chiropractic and like energy work kind of like interwoven together. Right. So they have like, instead of making these, they call them like osseous adjustments, where you're like getting like the cavitations, like the sounds, like when you get your back popped. It's not like that. They'll have like certain like spinal gateways. They're basically like sending energy through, and like what you're really trying to do is get this certain wave like motion to happen through your spine. And it's actually recognized, just like walking or swimming, as a central pattern generator. So basically it kind of helps like regulate your entire nervous system. And it's like a form of reorganizational healing.
Do you know who Sergei Grakovetsky is?
No.
He's got a book called The Spinal Engine that kind of discusses some of that stuff, as far as like the rotation and wave movement that comes out of the spine. And basically what he theorizes, and I think proves, is that almost all of our motion actually stems from our spine. So it is interesting to kind of, I guess there's a lot of pushback on chiropractic, publicly. And I would say I'm one of those people who kind of, I don't want to say fully poo-poos it, but I push back on it a little bit. But I also think it's silly to look at it and just say, this is completely bullshit, just like almost anything out there. What's been your take on chiropractic as a whole, out of curiosity?
Yeah. So, well, I'll wrap up the experience.
Please. Sorry, I totally got off topic.
No, it's all good. So, but basically what had happened is I got on the table, and it felt like I was on the table for an hour at least. I definitely wasn't, but it felt like it. And because I had like it was my first time with mushrooms, and I ate like 3.5 grams. So it was like enough where I was like, I'm feeling it, Yeah. It's not like, oh, I don't know if it's working. It's like,
I'm feeling it, Mr. Krabs.
Yeah, I was somewhere. And he made this contact on my sacrum, and I had my experience, like my first kind of like spinal wave, and I had the experience of my soul literally leaving my physical body and like hovering above me and like realigning in midair. And I was like, okay, well, I'm a believer of this stuff. And I think that I really like chiropractic a lot, but only because I've been able to experience what it's meant to be, rather than what it's often, portrayed as. Because ultimately chiropractic is a very like spiritual art. It's very energetic in nature. And I think that a lot of people like get away from that and almost look at it through like too much of a scientific lens. And there's some things that you can look at, look through that lens at, but I just don't think that in certain ways is one of them. If you want to like really get the full experience, if you're just like, hey, my spine's literally out of alignment, you're like, okay, cool. But like, why is it out of alignment? Like, what's pulling it out of alignment? Your muscles are pulling on your bones. Like, what are you doing that's like screwing that up? Right. But there's other layers beneath that I think are significantly more important. You're like, well, are you experiencing the certain behavioral pattern that's, causing these muscles to tense up and pull this bone out of alignment? Right. It's like, maybe you're just like a super high stress individual. You just like hold a lot in your, like the front of your neck. It's like, that's going to have an impact on your spine for sure. And the way that you move and the way that you breathe, like that's all going to impact it. Right. But that probably comes down to something that's a lot different than, just a bone thing or just a muscle thing. It's like, I don't know, man. Like there's probably other layers of, existence that matter beyond like just what you're seeing superficially.
Yeah. I think that's kind of a really important thing with this more holistically minded approach to stuff, is a lot of people are looking at just simply what is physically here. And, this is where I suppose it gets a little bit woo-woo, and this is where a lot of people kind of fall off with this, is it's like, yes, you do have to take a scientific approach to these kinds of things. You need to be able to tease out what's actually happening versus placebo versus, whatever else may be out there that we can measure. Like I was the head massage therapist at a chiropractor clinic once upon a time, and that was probably the worst my opinion had ever been about chiropractic, because I was literally just watching this revolving door with like 5 or 6 different doctors, and they would, crack, 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 or excuse me, they would put them on my table for 10 to 15 minutes. I would release whatever the muscle was that they worked on, crack, 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 put them on a roller table, then put them on a red light therapy, and they would bill insurance for every single step along the way. And I mean, per person, I think they were making probably like $100 plus every 15 minutes. Like, it was just insane how much money they were making, and just how, I guess how, I don't want to say formulaic, but something like that. It felt very dry and Western. And yeah, it made me really dislike it. How do you personally differentiate between these different things, where it's, you have the more Western, tangible, measurable things, and then you've got the more you just kind of feel it, of like Eastern minded things?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think research is great, right? But I think we have to also understand the limitations of research. And let's say, for example, if you try to do like almost all of the literature on anything like, brain or psychology related, we'll say psychology, because that and the brain aren't the same thing. We'll say the mind and the brain, we'll just kind of separate them. But if we're talking about like stuff based on the mind, that's really complex, because like people are going to behave differently when they're, in a controlled environment. It's like you're not truly understanding what's happening, because they're acting a certain way because they're like in this room doing this particular thing. You're like, well, that's not real life. So, I mean, I guess that's kind of cool, but like,
right. So there's severe limitations on a lot of different. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. Do you know that thing in quantum theory where it's like the outcome of it always changes as soon as they observe it?
Not that particular, but like something similar.
Okay, yeah, I can't remember what it is. I'll edit it into the YouTube video, but yeah, it's like super weird that as soon as we start observing things, it'll change so many outcomes, not just because of how we physically feel, but because of things that, we don't quite understand yet. But yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, but like I think it's interesting to me, because at least in the sector of the world that I kind of exist in, there's a big crossroads. And I think that's why I like the performance realm a lot, because I think there's a much more logical approach to things when you're viewing through the lens of like, hey, what's actually impacting performance, versus like, hey, this study said take 2,000 milligrams of curcumin twice a day and that gets this outcome. It's like, but do we want that specific outcome? Like, do we want to like blunt inflammation or whatever if we're trying to like do this other thing? Like, maybe not at that particular time, or like there's a lot of things that are like, well, if we ask the right question, it's going to give us a different outcome. And if we're not looking at things through like a truly holistic lens, because I don't think most people are, like they'll say that they're holistic and you're like, no, you're not. You're just looking at all the angles within your little box. You're not looking at all the angles, right? Because people will be like, I'm a strength coach. It's like, well, that's cool, but there's also other aspects besides like the musculoskeletal system. It's like you probably want to be looking at the nervous system. You probably want to be looking at the circulatory system and the respiratory system, and like all of these other aspects of things. You're like, there's limitations in potentially any of these. Right? It's like, why does that limitation exist? Is there a way that we can, sync these things up so that we're getting some kind of like effective synergy, instead of just looking at like each individual thing separately? Right? Because I think a lot of times people will view things as like these separate like entities, where it's like they're all things that simultaneously exist together inside a human organism.
I think that's something that gets really challenging the longer that you're a coach. Is you start noticing there's more things that you don't know, and you want to know them, you want to understand them, but you also have to realize that you can only learn so much. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something, I think it's from Alex Hormozy, and it's something like it's basically just about how you can't do everything. It's at some point in time, you have to choose the things that you're not going to do, the things that you're not going to be good at. And I think that's really hard for people. That's something that I really, really struggled with. And I think still do is I like knowing all these things. I want to know all these things, but then there are certain things that you come up to and realize like, okay, it would be cool to understand. I don't know. Let's go with like fascial lines. It's like, okay, fascial lines are really, really cool, but then you have to do a ton of like prerequisite study to understand some of that stuff. And then after you do that, you got to understand this. So it's like to really understand fascial lines and how they're all working, you basically got like 2 to 3 years of like dedicated study.
Yeah.
And that 2 to 3 years is time that you're taking away from potentially studying something else. So then it's, do you become a, you hit the jack of all trades, master of none, but better than a master of one kind of paradox where you have to decide, do you want to specialize? Do you want to be well-rounded? Do you, where would you say you kind of fall on that?
Yeah, so I definitely intend on being masterful, but with a particular like type of individual. So, my, I guess, target demographic, if you will, or like the person that I work with the best is realistically someone that has like similar enough experiences to what I've had, because I can relate to them first off, like if I go to Walmart and I look around, it's like most of those people I can't really relate with. Like I don't have a lot in common with them. There's nothing wrong with them. I just don't have a high degree of relatability. So, it's somebody that like wants to train hard and also like, wants to feel good, doesn't like really care about being overly perfect with things. If they get some niggles and stuff there, they're not going to freak out about it because it's like, that's just part of the process. And like, you want to be healthy, but you want to enjoy your life and have some balance there and be, more well-rounded from like a spiritual aspect and just the things that I'm the most interested in, because I feel like I'm able to provide the most value in those areas. And I'm the most interested in learning about those things. And inherently, I have the most to provide. And sure, it's like in a sense, like I'm jack of all trades, but like you don't have to be masterful at each little piece of the puzzle. You just need to understand how they work together. And if there's an issue, it's like, well, I at least know to look in this direction. And then you can learn more specifics on that thing if you need to. Like you don't need to be like, if somebody comes to me and they're a marathon runner, they're like, hey, like I really align with your messaging and like who you are as a person and everything you stand for, but like you're obviously not a marathon guy. Be like, hey, look, obviously running marathons is like a whole big thing for people, but it's really not going to be that hard for me to learn how to coach somebody to run marathons. Do you want to be the best marathon runner of all time? I'm probably not your guy. But like, do you want to be good and competitive and like have a lot of fun and also like live a well-rounded life while you do it? I can help you with that. So it's just like setting the constraints around like what they're really expecting out of it too.
So a lot of it for you is just kind of clarifying certain limitations on like where your ability and your expertise lies.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's like, hey, like, I want somebody that's like the foremost fascial expert. Like, I'm not that guy.
That ain't me.
I know much about fashion, but like, I don't know that much. Like,
right.
I'm not like a world expert.
Yeah. The jack of all trades thing, I think, does a really good job also of just helping you see when you've kind of hit a wall with a client or if you do need to refer out. Because it's like, if you, for example, we'll go with the marathoner, if you're coaching a marathon runner and, they're doing really, really well, and then 2 different races in a row, they perform a little bit under what you're expecting them to do. If you've got somewhat of an understanding about all these different topics, you're potentially going to go, oh, you know what? This looks like where we're kind of the most hung up. I have X amount of understanding of it, but it's looking like I'm probably going to need Y. So I need to find somebody who is Y. That way I can refer out. And that's, I think, also a really important part of coaching that a lot of people get hung up on is, again, they want to be the master of everything. They want to have the answer for everything. And it's hard to give that up for a lot of coaches, I think, when they very first start out.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I think the most valuable thing that I have in like my entire life is my friend group. And like the ability to just ask different people questions and like get their insights. Like, that's so valuable. Like I literally have people that are experts in neurology that are like, actual chemists and biologists. It's like, I'm going to ask those guys if I have a biology related question. I'm not going to just try to figure it out and be like, hey man, at least tell me like where to look.
Yeah, exactly. How do you challenge your beliefs with a lot of stuff? Because it seems like in my experience, I'm going to go with the like very stereotypical version of like holistic for this example, but it seems like a lot of people will start to kind of wade their feet into certain more fringe pools. And at some point in time, they'll be ankle deep in it, so to speak. And then it's like they get pulled into a whirlpool and that's it. There's absolutely no challenging their beliefs anymore. They're kind of caught up into it and that's it. So for the example that I saw a couple days ago that made this question come up is I'll call him very loosely an acquaintance. He's someone I know through someone, but we've never met in person. And he just posts a lot of dumb shit on Twitter, if I'm being totally real.
Yeah.
And he posted something and I replied to it and was just like, hey, if you're implying this, here's the answer. And he never replied to me. And I think that's where a lot of people end up getting stuck is they're constantly looking for confirmation as opposed to being like, you know what if this is wrong? How would I find that out? And how can I get the true answer? Tom Bilyeu from Impact Theory and like a bunch of other different companies has this thing where he says, if your goal is always to be the smartest person, you're going to fail. But if your goal is to be the person who always learns and figures out if they're wrong, you're always going to win. How do you personally challenge these beliefs for yourself? How do you know when you're wrong?
Yeah, I mostly just do my best to put myself in rooms with people that I know are so far ahead of me that I will likely never catch up.
Be the dumbest person in the room.
Even if I try my best for the rest of my life, I'll probably never catch up because they're just so skilled just naturally. But I really like that because I'm generally a competitive person. And if I know it's possible, then I'm like, well, fuck, like I'm gonna do everything I can to try to make this thing happen. And like, you know, be at least like in the same like realm where I can speak to this person and like we both have like full comprehension of what each other's saying and you can have like coherent conversations. So I think that's one of the more useful things is, you know, challenging myself at least to be able to have quality conversations with people that are significantly above my level in terms of like my current abilities in whatever that is. Right. And I have to obviously be interested in it, but I tend to, you know, surround myself with people that are also kind of like a jack of all trades, if you will, but are very, very good at doing that. Like
right.
In world-class results in many different sports or domains. You're like, that's pretty crazy if you can go to 15 different sports and get, you know, the best results in the world with all of those types of people. Like, I think I like that.
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
I'm like a, you know, variety is like one of the things that gets me the most excited.
Variety is the spice of life.
Yeah, but like you know, even with training, like if I had a new training plan every single week, I would probably love that.
Yeah.
Like I just thrive on the variety aspect of things.
It gives you a lot more to play with, and it kind of keeps your mind, kind of keeps scratching your brain as opposed to like, oh, you know, another fat loss client, another fat loss client, another fat loss client. It's like and not that there's anything wrong with training that kind of person. You know, I have a good handful of people that I'm focused on with fat loss, but it's, you know, you can only argue with the law of thermodynamics so much before it's like, okay, like, yes, you do have a slower metabolism, but this is still reality. And like, yes, you do have some hormone challenges, but this is still reality. So it's like, we can correct these things, but you still need to, whatever. What have you actually changed your mind on? So something that I was thinking about recently, have you seen all the studies that were coming out pretty recently about like stretching and injury prevention?
Not so much.
All right, I'm going to keep it real. This tickled my booty so bad. Like I was not happy about any of this stuff because I had made so much content about this, and it's still something I'm kind of still a little hung up on it because it's something I believed so strongly because I learned it from so many people who were infinitely smarter than I was. And it's basically showing that stretching actually doesn't have that much of a correlation with decreased injuries, with improved movement, with this, with that, with all these different things, that it was like, oh, okay, well, maybe stretching doesn't do this, but it does do that. And then it's like, well, no, it actually doesn't do that either. And it doesn't do this. And so it's crazy. I'll have to link it to you after this. But that was something that was really, really tough for me to let go of, even though when I looked back on it, I remember learning it. And in my own experience, I remember, so I kind of dabble in powerlifting just because I think it's fun. I like being really strong, but I wasn't really doing that much static or dynamic stretching. I would just kind of physically warm my body up, get into a movement, and go get into it and start, stacking some weight on until I got into the actual working weight. And I would move well, and I wouldn't get injured, and I would feel strong. And then I would have all these professionals above me saying, no, you need to stretch. And then I'd go, okay, I would stretch. And then I'd get hurt, and then I wouldn't push as much weight. And it was like, well, fuck, dude, I know these people are saying this, but this isn't my experience. This isn't my personal reality with this stuff. What were some things that you kind of had to challenge yourself on that maybe you did or didn't change your mind on? How did that go for you?
Yeah, well, I'd say the most recent thing probably would be, so there's some reasonably compelling research in the hypertrophy world around effective reps. It's like,
oh God, are we going to talk about long length partials?
No, not necessarily.
Oh, dude. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
We could, but just in general, like the whole, the notion that like the last 5 reps before failure are the ones that like stimulate, the most growth, right? So there's certain people that I've even learned from that were like, hey man, like, we really don't ever need to train outside of the, 4 to 6 rep range in that case. Like maybe for a novice person, maybe like 7, 8 reps, like maybe they get a couple more effective reps or whatever, because, their ability to recruit motor units is so low and there's maybe like a bigger threshold or whatever. And, I thought about that. I'm like, well, I don't want to do just 4 to 6 rep work all the time. That fucking sucks. Like my joints don't feel good. Like I don't even enjoy it. I like getting sick pumps. I like sweating and breathing heavy. But then they'll be like, no, but like if you do high reps, it causes a lot of fatigue. And you're like, who fucking cares?
Dude, I fatigue like crazy in the 4 to 6 rep range. Like,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, like I'm back in a powerlifting split right now just for funsies. And like I'm smoking the shit out of myself right now. But then I'll wrap it up toward the end with some like really high rep, low weight, really just like getting, the burn, so to speak. And like there's all these people that say, no, this is how it is. This is how it is. And then I'm like you said, well, shit, my back hurts, my this hurts, my joints are killing me.
Yeah, it's like people all have their own confirmation bias, right? Then I started getting more into energy systems, and I was like, well, these guys are just full of shit because we have a massive spectrum of energy systems, and we should probably train them all if we want to be like good humans. Like it probably makes a good amount of sense to like be explosive and have a good capacity for like creatine phosphate work. It probably makes a good amount of sense to like suffer through glycolysis and like build some kind of threshold within that and like be fit aerobically to be able to recover these other systems. Like there's value in all of it. So it's real weird to me when people are like, this is the one thing that like does the best for like muscle growth. You're like, yeah, but what if you do like sets of 30 and it improves capillary density and then you can get more blood flow to your tissues? Like that probably matters. Or like, there's all these like little like in between the lines things where people just skip that stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
did you ever listen to Mind Pump?
I used to.
Yeah, same with me, but I, got to shout them out because those guys did a lot for me back in the day. They have a thing that they say where it's like the thing that you're not doing because you have some dogma around not doing it is probably the thing that you do need to do. So like powerlifters who absolutely hate flexibility and mobility should probably go do a yoga class. Bodybuilders who hate strength because they're just trying to get a sick pump and build a lot of hypertrophy. It's like you should probably do some strength training, like that like 4 to 6 to 8 rep range. There does seem to be this, no matter what, people will kind of find their own fitness dogma, and it's really, really tough to get out of it. To kind of do a little bit of a shift, you do a lot of blood work stuff on your page, kind of interpreting blood work. How did you get into that?
Honestly, through my own struggles, because I was maybe 2021, and I was like, man, I feel like I have low testosterone. Like, I don't know why, but I really feel like I do. And I like went to the doctor and he was like, no, man, it's like 237. That's not bad. I was like,
oh my God,
bro, that's not good.
That's really bad.
And then he was like, no, it'll bounce back. You're young. And I was like, I don't think that's true, but okay.
Not if you don't know how to make it bounce back.
Yeah, but like, I mean, realistically, if I knew what I knew now, like it probably would have been, way better off. But like, I had no idea about like allostatic load and like, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, realistically, I probably could have like got it like higher. But I ended up kind of going down the path of, getting on TRT and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, this all seems kind of like bullshit too, because they're just trying to take all my money because they think I need like 15 different things all the time. And I'm like, that doesn't seem right either. And I was like, man, I better figure out how to like interpret this shit on my own. Cause like, I don't want to just be, having to rely on these guys to give me answers forever. And I kind of just like went down that rabbit hole. I was like, hey, let me hire like a mentor. And then I was like, nah, I don't really like that guy. Let me hire a different mentor. And then I'm like, ooh, I like that person. And I'll learn from them for a couple of years, read some books, read some studies. And like, it's just like this whole like self-discovery process. And I think that that's really kind of how most of the things that I am into kind of came about, was just be like, well, shit, this is a limitation right now. How can I overcome this? Like, I bet other people have that same limitation. How can I help them overcome that? And oddly, most of us have like oddly similar issues.
Oh yeah.
Like, well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this one out. We're gonna have to, tweak these couple things. It's like, oh, your thyroid's low. It's like, well, let's say, for example, somebody has like normal T4 levels and they have like low free T3. You're like, maybe they just need selenium. So has anybody thought about like their micronutrients? Like, they actually need that to convert. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, no one ever told you that. They just put you on thyroid meds. You're like, well, we should probably start with selenium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's starting with like the lowest, I don't know how I would word this, but like the kind of the lowest intervention possible, I think is something that's lost on a lot of people nowadays, where it's like, okay, this is wrong. We're going to go full bore, throw the whole kitchen sink at it. And it's like, holy shit, dude. Like, can we try doing something with like, hey, let's try this food. This has some correlation. It's like, okay, that didn't work. Let's try this supplement. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try this therapy. Okay, that didn't work. Now let's get into the pharmaceutical realm. But people are really, really quick. Like you said, realizing you were in the, 200s for testosterone and be like, well, shit, I guess let's get on TRT. And it's like, damn, dude, could we have done something a little bit more naturally to try out though?
Yeah. Like, I don't have any regrets about it by any means, but, I probably, honestly, I don't even know if I would do it differently, because I think that the way that I've got to where I'm at now is like been fruitful. But, I would have probably at least questioned things more, been like, is there like maybe another way that we could set things up that's like more synergistic with my whole life? Like, do we need to like do all of these things, or is there a way that we could like tweak a couple variables and like align things? Because I think that a lot of times people are not nearly specific enough, and they do this like whole kitchen sink thing. They're like, let me try all of these things. You're like, well, what if we just tried like one variable at a time?
And what if we just tried one so we knew what actually worked?
Yeah, people don't do that though.
Yeah.
Like, that's science. You're like, it's like completely individualized too.
Yeah. Well, it's tough, because then people, like that's going to take longer. So for example, I started working with Merrick Health, got like 14 vials of blood drawn, got 64 pages of blood work back from them. And I was like, hey, like, I really don't want to go like, the pharmaceutical route. Don't get me wrong, my testosterone was good. I think I was in like the high 6s or the mid 700s, but I was still like, could it be higher naturally? So, we did this. Also, I got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis 20 years ago, before it was cool. Not a big deal. But because of that, carnivore has been kind of the only real thing that's worked for me. And I fucking hated it, but I did every elimination diet under the sun. I did, all these different things. I saw gut health experts, did this, did that, did blah, blah, blah. And then it was like, go carnivore, boom, all symptoms gone immediately. And I was pissed about it. But, I think my mic just cut out. So I was pissed about that, because it's a severely, severely limited diet. I think it is an inoptimal way to live, but it is the best way that I've treated symptoms. And because of that, I've had to get on XYZ supplements. And it's like, okay, kind of this robbing Peter to pay Paul situation now. But yeah, I'm not sure where I was going with that. I think just kind of because of how many supplements they gave me, they said, you're going to want to take XYZ. It's like, okay, well, yes, I do need to get an outcome. So we're going to have to throw the kitchen sink at it. I'm kind of doing it the reverse order, where I'm going to get bloods again in about 2.5 months. And then I'll remove one or two things and then check them again, and then remove two things and check them again. But yeah, what's been your flow chart for trying this stuff out with clients and yourself?
Yeah, just in general. Yeah.
Let's say for like supplements versus pharmaceuticals versus whatever else.
Yeah, so I always start with supplements and behaviors first, and I think that every supplement needs a behavioral pairing, and most behaviors, if you want to create like real change, probably need a supplement. So, for example, if somebody sucks at waking up in the morning, maybe we put some selenium and the copper in the morning, and maybe we put like some magnesium and zinc and boron before bed, because we're going to mostly facilitate like nighttime based stuff in the evening time with that. And then we're pretty much just countering that, like with, opposing nutrients in the morning time to promote more wakefulness. And like maybe we pair that with like sunlight and some moonlight. It's like, that's a pretty like real basic thing, but everybody needs these nutrients, right? And they're all pretty fucking like hard to get through nutrition unless you're like being really hyper specific. So and then I'll tend to like plug in other things like, okay, cool, vitamin D. Do we need more sex hormone actions? Maybe we put that before bed. Do we need more mitochondrial changes and like energy production? Maybe we put it in the morning. Cool. Right. Obviously, you need some fats with that. So, nutritionally, we're going to have to pair that up properly so that it actually absorbs. And then outside of that, a lot of things end up being like just more specific and like need based, right? You're like, well, would it make sense to have like some chromium post workout to help with actually doing the proper things that you want with the carbohydrates that you're intaking, maybe, or some berberine or something like that? If that's a limitation, sure, great. Maybe we want to enhance post workout like glycogen replenishment or whatever, and like super compensate a little bit, like store a little bit more than we depleted. Or morning time, you're like, oh, I wake up with low moods. Like, well, actually, for example, I had a client the other week. He told me specifically, because I was like, hey, man, have you been doing your morning routine? He's like, no. I was like, okay, well, that's why I put it in there. So maybe we could try that. But he was like, yeah, I wake up every day and I'm tired. And it takes me, one monster and about 30 minutes of talking to somebody before I feel awake. And I was like, well, that's weird because your morning routine was literally meant to counteract that, like that specifically. And he's like, oh, that's weird. I don't know why I haven't done that. It's like, I don't know. Crazy. Maybe try it out, man. Just like try it for like 5 days and see what happens. But it was nothing crazy. It was like, hey man, we're gonna have a little bit of saffron to kind of like boost your morning mood a little bit. Maybe we'll have like a little bit of injectable carnitine to kind of like get that norepinephrine response that you're trying to get from the caffeine anyways. And we take like a nasal breathing walk in the sun, which the sun itself will activate CYP enzymes in the liver to actually like help you metabolize whatever nutrients or drugs you're taking in better. And maybe throw the med ball 10 times for height, just like boom, just like be a little explosive, get a little aggressive, start to kind of like get the creatine flowing throughout your system and allow you to actually be awake, right? And then we put some drills after that to just get his like the centers of his brain that have to do with hearing and speaking kind of synced up and active together. It's nothing crazy, man. It's just like, hey man, just read 3 to 5 pages out loud to yourself as fluently as possible, and that's it. And he was like, oh, well, that's pretty simple. Feels way better within 3 to 5 days. But it's one of those things where it comes down to like specific needs and really listening to what that individual is saying and kind of like creating a flow chart based on that person rather than like an overarching thing. It's like there's some things that everybody gets. It's like, hey man, if you're a human, you probably need these things. Like if you don't get sunlight, you're not going to feel well. There's no way to counteract that. It's like we're all light-based creatures. But there's other things that are way more specific, and then you kind of fill in the gaps there. But I think it makes a lot of sense to cover the baseline stuff off the bat and just see like what's left over. So you can solve a lot of issues with real simple things. Like maybe somebody came to you with like 50 symptoms. You plug in some basic stuff, and maybe they have 20 symptoms after a month. You're like, now we have a pretty good idea like what's going on, right? It's not all over the place. Like things are a little bit more stable. We can make more proper decisions. Maybe their training's a little bit better, their nutrition's more dialed in, they're sleeping better. Great. Maybe all of these things we were worried about aren't even an issue. They were just like a real basic, like fundamental flaws.
It seems like a lot of the changes that people are having to make nowadays all kind of go back to this, like live the way that you would have 2,000 years ago kind of concept, where it's like, okay, like drink good, like health, good high quality water, make sure you're sleeping well, get some sunlight in the morning. a lot of people get on these like routines that are really, really popular. I would say probably the biggest, the most popular one nowadays is probably like the Huberman protocol. You know, it's like get some cold, wake up. I think it's like wake up at 5 a.m., take a cold shower, go get some sunlight in your eyes, do this, do this, do that. You know, it's like, I don't know, however many different steps, but one of the pushbacks that I've seen whenever people start talking about that is like, okay, that's cool that you want me to do this protocol, but that's going to take me an hour. So my morning routine is an hour, and I still have to do everything else in my day. And I feel like that's where a lot of people get hung up is there's so much, one, there's so much for them to do. Two, as a coach, you want to be able to just implement all these different things to get them as good of an outcome as possible, as quickly as possible. I think it's really, really tough to kind of balance what's doable and what's actually giving them a little bit of a push and what you know that they can get done. And you know, what's still manageable for their daily routine. It's really, really tough to work all that out, especially with the average person. What's that been like for you?
To be fair, I don't really coach many average people anymore, so that's, you know, a whole different thing. Most of the people that come to me like want to get like the extra little bits out of things, but in general, you know, that's kind of where the intuition aspect of coaching comes in, I think. And you're like, well, they told me these things, but I know that like this is probably going to be kind of hard for them to actually implement. What if I give them something that I know 100% they can do, and it's not going to overextend them in any way at all, and then I can always dial it up, right?
Like it's going to mentally register as a win for them too.
Right. Like I'd rather build momentum. I'd rather like start off a mile short than an inch too far.
I like that. I think that's a really, really good little quote. I've never heard that one, but I think that perfectly kind of sums that mindset up. How do you align the idea of like holistic stuff with pharmaceuticals? So more specifically, actually, no, I think just that is probably a good one. Like how have you kind of managed that with people?
I think a lot of it comes down to just like speaking to like the cost and the drawback, or like, yeah, just the cost of things, like the you know,
cost benefit analysis,
or yeah, you know, like everything that you do has some kind of cost, like an energetic cost, a physical, like monetary cost, whatever. You're like, well, is this a path you want to take? You know, like there's some people that are like, hey, I want to get the most out of this. It's like, man, we're probably going to want some carnitine. We're probably going to want some growth hormone, some glutathione. Like we might want all these different things in play. But if you're like, I want to do everything I can without these things, you're like, great, we can also do that. It's just, you're just going to be limited. We just can't go as far. Right. So I just talk to people and be real with them. Like, you know, I don't have any particular bias where I'm like, I'm this holistic guy. It's like, in my mind, that is part of being holistic. Like that is part
being able to see what you can't do. Dude, oh my God, yes.
It's like, what's wrong with that? That's an option. We should probably acknowledge all our options if we want to like make the most effective choices. But I think people be like, well, I can't do that. And you're like, I don't have limitations on stuff. Like we can do anything. I don't care. You know, like I've had a 40-year-old mom of 3 and wife take clenbuterol because she like wanted to get leaner faster. I'm like, I don't care, man. Like this is what we're going to take from, you know, benefit and a cost perspective. Like, do you want to do this? She's like, that sounds great. I'm like, cool, we'll do it.
Wow. Yeah. That's pretty impressive. That's definitely a bold move. And I would say that's pretty uncommon one too. Not that that's wrong, but it's definitely an uncommon step to take. A lot of people, once they start getting into pharmaceuticals, I think there's this very, very like bad, you know, like you said, this very negative connotation around it. L-carnitine, of all the supplements that I've posted, I get more questions about any with injectable L-carnitine. And it's really funny because,
well, it's because it comes in a needle. So people are like,
exactly. Like as far as things that are actually like, no pun intended, moving the needle, I would say L-carnitine is probably middle of the road for me. Like it's definitely very, very effective. But there's been a lot of things that I would say have yielded a more significant benefit. But it is something I get a shitload of questions on. So tell us about L-carnitine.
Yeah. So I think when we're looking at, you know, assessing the potential like upsides or the drawbacks of anything, we're kind of have to be specific of like the outcome we're trying to get. You know what I mean? So it's like carnitine, what do you want out of it? are using it to enhance beta oxidation because you suck at using fat as a fuel source, that could be an effective way to go, right?
That was me.
Not a bad option. You don't need that much. You could go pretty low dose. You could go 100, 150, 200 milligrams. Like, it doesn't need to be a lot to enhance that. And maybe pair it with like, some nasal breathing cardio or something like that. And you're facilitating that process better, but you can use it for enhancing like androgen receptor sensitivity and all that kind of stuff, which I think is effective, but it's like super overblown. That's definitely never the purpose I choose it for. Realistically, man, like the 2-3 biggest things I use carnitine for would be like enhancing beta oxidation, improving work capacity in the gym. And it's for different reasons than most people probably even like understand, but carnitine is glycogen sparing. And it basically, we call it like, it opens up a bigger creatine window. So more of the work that you do is done in your creatine phosphate energy system. So you're not needing to use a bunch of, glycogen and stuff like that to actually like do your training, right? So let's say, for example, maybe you can only usually do 3 reps in a creatine phosphate environment. Maybe it opens up the window, you can do 5 or something to that nature. You know what I mean? So it just like biases the energy system that you're using more toward that end of the spectrum, where you can do like more like powerful, explosive work without like depleting yourself of glycogen.
So that's really interesting. That was actually something that I was noticing, but I didn't realize that was why.
Yeah.
So maybe it's moving the needle a little bit more than I had realized.
It's like a background player that does a lot of things, but like very subtly.
Yeah, that's kind of how I was sort of thinking of it. It has sort of felt like the unthanked employee, it's like the person that you don't really notice that they're not, or that they're doing a shitload until they get fired. And it's like, oh God, why is the company falling apart now?
Yeah. Like you start getting leaner and you feel better, like you have better energy, because that also helps. I don't know if that would really help, but it gives you like a norepinephrine response. Like you get like that, catecholamine response. Some people have to monitor that though, like their dosing and their frequency, because it'll make them too aggressive. Right? Like I noticed if I take too much carnitine, then I'm a little bit too edgy, and I'm like, that's maybe not productive for what I want out of the day, right? Because if I have a bunch of like client check-ins or something like that, do I like really need to be like grabbing the table, hyped up? It's like, no, man, I don't. I need to be
about to hop into a yoga class. Let's go.
Right. It's like it's the wrong behavior strategy for what you're trying to accomplish.
The behavior attachments to supplements is something really interesting, and it feels like something that's been getting more popular, because I mean, if you look at like the supplement industry, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that, they were doing, God, even before that, but I would say I really started noticing it in my early 20s, where it was each supplement had a time of day or an action related to it. So it was, this is the supplement you take in the morning. This is the supplement that you take pre, intra, and post workout. This is the supplement that you take before bed. This is the one that you take with dinner. Like everything has an attachment to it, which one is brilliant from a marketing perspective because it helps them connect usage to getting through the product so that they're going to buy more. But it's also really, really good for an adherence perspective, because when you attach an item to a habit or to a process in your life, you're much more likely to stay consistent on it. I think sleep is something that has been getting more and more, sleep and recovery has been getting more and more interest than like anything else I can think of in the last 5-10 years. Obviously supplementation is only as good as you are deficient in something, but what would you say, with relatively low risk, you can confidently say like, hey, you know what, if your sleep is bad, you could probably do XYZ.
Yeah. Definitely like magnesium, zinc, boron, all super safe and effective, and will help kind of potentiate the actions of like the sex hormone things that are happening over the sleeping hours, and tend to be very calming in nature, and something to facilitate GABA. So, it could be whatever. It could be valerian. It could be ashwagandha. It could be like just something that kind of gets you in that more like serene type state. And then you're basically, I focus the evening window of time around like peace and acceptance. So that would be a great time for journaling practices, for things like getting some moonlight in your eyes, sticking your feet on the ground, doing some breathing practices, like just things that kind of like generally bring you down. right? And then the morning time is just the complete opposite. You're just doing something that's going to kind of like wake you up, right? I think a lot of people screw that up because they're just picking the wrong strategies. And they're like, dude, no wonder you wake up feeling like shit. You just wake up, get on your phone, lay there for hours, and then you're like, oh, got to go to work. Oh, wow. Sure, you're not going to feel good.
Man, I got to shout out Mind Pump again. I remember them talking about everybody has a morning routine. Almost nobody has a bedtime routine.
You have, well, everybody inherently has a morning and a bedtime routine. It's just like,
it's just a shit one.
Everybody's doing something before they go to bed.
Yeah. Most people, it's chilling on a couch, watching something on Netflix or whatever. But yeah, like I remember them talking about like, hey, dimming your lights, which is actually not necessarily good. I don't quote me on that, but I remember seeing something where it was like light dimmers don't actually decrease the light. What it does is it makes it turn on and off at a faster rate. So it actually stimulates certain things that'll wake you back up in a weird kind of roundabout way. But anyway, lower lights, blue blocker glasses on. I suppose there's some pushback on that nowadays, but I don't necessarily agree with it. And then, yeah, like you said, doing something calm. For me, it was always like reading in bed. It's crazy how much we have tried to get away from routine. And I think a lot of that is probably people just mentally pushing back because it's like, oh, like I don't want to have routine. I want to have freedom to do blah, 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 blah. And it's like, right. But creating routine around these things gives you a better quality of life. It gives you more freedom in the long run. It does all these different things. So it's like you create some rigidity around certain things and improve it. It's going to make it becomes this 1 + 1 = 3 situation just by doing a few good things in your life.
Yeah. And I think that's what the behavior stuff really equates to. Is it is like that 1 + 1 = 3, especially if you have like, a supplement paired with a behavior, you're getting like something extra out of it. Versus
absolutely
the behavior of just taking the supplement. It's like they're cool on their own, but you're just not getting the same kind of effect as if you apply them simultaneously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry,
what was that?
No, it's like 2 things versus 1. Obviously, you're getting more of an effect.
Yeah. But no, I get you. You have that sort of multiplying effect of how they're kind of tying into each other. What do you think there's any like really promising things that are kind of emerging over the hill?
In terms of supplements?
I guess in terms of anything you've been looking into. I'll leave that open.
Yeah. So at least in the performance world, I think that the use of things like injectable glutathione and carnitine, choline, and a whole bunch of other compounds are actually super cool because it decreases people's need to actually take more PEDs. It's like they're taking like all this testosterone or trenbolone or whatever. It's like you probably don't need that. Realistically, like all you really need to do is like facilitate your ability to keep recovering from the stress that you're imposing and keeping yourself healthy enough to like keep doing it and like be a good human as a whole. Because I think a lot of people like just add tons of stress to their system, like doing a bunch of different things, whether it's taking too many drugs or not sleeping enough or whatever. And I think there's a lot of things that are starting to improve around that stuff, and people are waking up to the need for the synergies between things and the idea that like, hey, like health is kind of the foundation for anything you really do want to do. It's not like the be all end all, but it's like at least the starting point that you need to like get your way in the door with, which I think is pretty cool. Just that's becoming more of like a thing on the forefront where it's almost like I almost view health as more of like a passing through. You're like, okay, cool. We have to get here before we can do anything else. It's like, this isn't the stopping point, but like we have to get here before this other stuff matters. And it seems like that notion's catching on more.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think people are starting to prioritize stuff. Ironically, I feel like a lot of the prioritization around like health and wellness actually came out of kind of the blowback of like body positivity, people being like, hey, like health is subjective, health is, this and that. And it's like, well, that sounds nice and that's fun, but like, no, I don't know if you can be healthy at, 500 pounds, at least not to any real degree. And I feel like the way that got pushed to such an insane degree by so many different people, sort of made the average person kind of reflect upon themselves, and it was like, well, shit, I'm only 200 pounds, but is that actually healthy, or is that just what, people have been saying to placate me? And I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to that, kind of being placated like that for such a long time. And it is really cool to see, because you're starting to see people, kind of just be like, you know what, like, fuck this. I do feel like shit. It doesn't really matter if people say I'm healthy. I feel like shit. So it is exciting to see that change starting to come up. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you're really wanting to cover?
Well, I guess it depends. What with people that listen to your podcast and consume your information, what are they generally interested in?
That's a good question. So I've kind of gone across the board. I've got my fair. I had somebody say, your niche is discovering the truth that is behind a conspiracy and showing what's actually real. And I was like, so I'm a conspiracy theorist? And he goes, no, no, no. You're showing that every conspiracy theory has a grain of truth, but that there's something else beyond that. So a lot of my stuff is that. I did a video on lab grown meat. I had a great time doing that, and I got some really, really good feedback about that. But then I've also done things as simple as like, the last episode that I did was about like alcohol and sobriety. I have done episodes about coaching. I've done, so it's I kind of all across the board. But another one that's been really interesting, I do a lot of mindfulness stuff too. So I would say you and I, if we were to compare our audiences, it's probably closer to a circle than not. So whatever's in your mind is probably something you can talk about.
Okay. Well, I think that, do you do much about like nootropics?
Very, very little amount. It was something I was dipping my toes into once upon a time, and then I kind of just fell off of it. I sort of got a little disenfranchised with them, not because there was anything wrong, but because at the time there wasn't enough compelling evidence for it. So I think this is, whatever you're about to say is actually going to be exactly what you should say.
Okay. Yeah, I think that I remember a couple years, maybe 3 or 4 years back, when I was kind of like, forming my online business and just like figuring out like who I kind of wanted to be as a human and all that kind of stuff. And it was just like a big like transition point in my life where I was kind of awakening to, different layers of truth. And I remember talking to one of my friends, Andy. He's his Instagram is Go Superbrain, super, super crazy smart dude. But he put me on to Noopept. And I was like, So I remember on the first call I ever had with him, I was like, dude, you're so smart. I have no idea like how I could ever even like come close. He was like, bro, anybody can become a genius with Noopept. And I kind of just took that to heart. I was like, all right, cool. So yeah, I've figured out through a whole lot of trial and error and stuff, like a pretty cool brain stack / like combination of, activities and products that I literally have never taken it and not felt, the best that I've ever felt. It's like extremely repeatable. I'm like, wow, if I need to be this type of person today and be like extremely on it from like, a brain perspective and be very sharp, be very fluent with my words, be really creative, all this stuff, like without fail, it happens every single time. So maybe there's gonna be somebody. Yeah, no, there maybe there'd be somebody that'd be interested.
Yeah, so, dude, share it.
What I like personally, and I've seen a lot of people benefit quite a lot from it, is 10 milligrams of Noopept, 1 milliliter of nectar. It's a carnitine choline blend from Better Through Biology. 300 milligrams of alpha GPC, and a little bit of caffeine, like 100, 200 milligrams of caffeine. But the important aspect is what you do beforehand to actually facilitate your biology doing what you want it to do. Because it's just as much about how your body receives the compounds and the state that you're in when they enter your body as it is what you actually take. So for me, what I really, really like doing is, like I'll wake up, hydrate, and have like a fat-based meal. So for me, usually it's something quick and easy. It'd be like, protein shake with some MCT oil and, a little bit of kefir. And then I'll take a little nasal breathing walk. I'll throw the med ball 10 to 20 times, just like as powerful as I can, resting 20, 30 seconds between throws, trying to like get the ball higher or further every time, depending on like how I'm throwing it and like my intent. And then I'll, do some kind of brain drill afterward, depending on like what I'm needing out of it. Usually for me, it's something really simple, literally just like, reading a few pages out loud to myself. But it could be, there's a few different ones, but that's probably the easiest starting point that I've seen people like actually do consistently, because some of the more complex ones, people are like, oh, that's like 5 steps. I don't want to do that. So it's like, read something that's like somewhat challenging for you to read, but read it as clearly as you possibly can and with as minimal errors as you can. Right. So like no stuttering, no missing words, any of that kind of stuff. Then take the products and then do whatever kind of work you want to do for the day. And I think it's massively helpful because what you're doing with you're basically doing activities prior that are facilitating the exact thing that you're getting from the supplements, so that they have a really close synergistic pairing. So for example, Noopept does a couple cool things. It's specific to enhancing functions at your motor cortex and within your auditory and your speech centers in your brain. So, in terms of you need to learn a new movement or some kind of like physical skill, or, syncing up your ability to like actually hear things more clearly and precisely, or speak more fluently, makes a huge, huge difference. And it also has an effect on decreasing glutamate toxicity in the brain. So basically, like if you've ever been like studying or working and then like you're on fire and then eventually your brain's just like, fuck, like I just can't think clearly anymore, and your brain's all fuzzy and you just like can't get it back. It basically wipes that out. So that's no longer an issue, and you can just keep working. So it kind of like takes the brakes off of your brain in a way where like you're in a flow state and you just can keep that all day.
That's sick. I can dig that. Do you have any referral codes or anything for them?
No, to be honest.
Okay.
Nothing too crazy.
How do you spell Noopept?
Noopept.
Heck yeah.
Currently hard to source, but cosmicnootropics.com is the best way to access it at the current moment. So it's like apparently super popular, but nobody talks about it. It's one of those things that people use. I call it like more of like a sophisticated nootropic. Like people that are like really trying to perform at a high level tend to use it, but it's not like a commonplace thing where everyone's like, take the Noopept. It's like, and if you really want to take your brain to the next level, take the Noopept.
Do you think there's any risk for any of these things to, down the line, end up being one of those things where it's like, oh, we thought it did X, Y, Z, but here were the unintended consequences, for lack of a better word? Not to like put a damper on it, but I'm thinking of like a Ephedra, it's like, oh my God, this is an amazing fat loss drug. And then it's like, hey, here were some issues that we hadn't expected.
No, I don't think so. I think the only downside is it does enhance your ability to like access a neuroplastic state. So if you're doing a bunch of dumb shit while you're using it, you're also going to remember that. So
that's
like,
fair.
Like make bad behavior stick harder.
Right.
So like
it'll overly grease that groove more or less.
Right. Where it's like, man, if you do the wrong things, your brain's going to remember that even more.
Right.
So it's one of those things you have to like consciously use it.
Right. I got you. Well, one of the other things, dude, to kind of piggyback off of that you've said a couple times that I think a lot of people might turn their nose up at is associating, or rather connecting a mood to a supplement or to whatever it may be. Because as many people out there would want to be tempted to be like, or would probably not even be tempted, would just be like, oh, that sounds like bullshit. I think the simplest example of like how true that actually is, anybody out there who's done mushrooms, go get in a fight with your girlfriend and then take mushrooms and tell me that your mood doesn't affect the things that you take. It's like, oh, they're connected. I promise. You've gotta kind of prime your body for the things that you're ingesting.
Well, plus you also need to be taking things in specific formats for specific reasons. right? You're not just like willy-nilly, like my morning routine, I take Noopept every day. It's like, it's not a thing you use like that. It's one of those things where it's like, hey, do I really need this outcome from the day? Like if I literally am like, hey, literally all I really need to do today is like, jump on, a couple client calls, and it's really not all that taxing. They're super easy clients that I get along with well, and they're like, it's real simple. It's like, you really don't need the new apps. Like you don't have to be overly creative. It's like, oh, you have like 3 podcasts in one day and you want to be as sharp as possible. That's probably the day for that, but you're going to want to make sure you check your ego, because if you're feeling like too good, you might be coming from a place of, being in your ego more than you would like. And maybe you feel like a dick on the call.
Right.
You feel like so great, but they're like, hey man, you're kind of like killing my vibe because you feel so good, but you're like making me feel weird.
Real high and mighty, just absolutely flying over everybody.
Right. And I've done that too. And I'm like, okay, check that. I'm not going to do that for that kind of person. But there's some people it's like perfect, because if you behave that way, it hypes them up more. And then you're getting the best out of them.
Yeah, definitely. Cool, man. Well, anything else that you want to toss in there before we wrap this up?
No, man. I think the biggest thing that I could leave anybody with is, if you want to, because most people are really, really stressed. And I think the simplest thing that has helped a lot of people be less stressed is gaining an understanding of what they actually have to do in a day and the importance of that thing and the cost of that thing. So for example, creating some kind of priority list where it's like, hey, priority list number 1, do X podcast today, because it's literally doing a podcast. You're like, okay, what's the importance on a scale of 1 to 10? You're like, well, maybe this is like a good thing for gaining more reach in my career. Maybe it does this thing and that thing. I get to gain more friends. I get to like understand myself better through proper questions. Like, we'll classify that as a 10. Like, it's super important to me. But then you're like, what's the actual energetic cost? You're like, well, that's actually gonna be really fun and something I can do with ease. So maybe it's like a 2, right? But if you have another thing on the list, you're like, oh man, that's like a 4 for importance and a 10 for cost. That's not getting done today.
Right.
But I think it really helps having some kind of checks and balances system. So, because a lot of people that I've noticed are just like running around like crazy, like a chicken with their head cut off, trying to do all this stuff, but they don't ever slow down enough to like take account of like what they're actually doing. And it feels like they're doing a lot, but they really don't have that much going on. So if that resonates with anybody, could be a cool practice.
Hell yeah. I can dig it, bro. All righty. Well, if people want to find you, if they want to hear more from you, if they got some questions, what's your Instagram at? What's your website?
Yeah, Coach_Taylor22 for Instagram. Currently don't have a website. I'm actually working on that at the moment. I don't even know how I got this far, because I've been a terrible business person. But
dude, no, I was the same way. Like I've been coaching for over a decade at this point, and I didn't get a website until like 3 or 4 years ago. So
it's like the weirdest thing. You're like, okay, I have a pretty good business, and no one would ever know it because
I think it's just honestly because of you and I growing up in the Instagram generation, where it was like social media kind of ended up being the primary website, even though some people still do use websites. But anyway, alrighty. So Taylor Seibel, right?
Yep.
All right, Taylor Seibel at Coach_Taylor TAYLOR 22. Yep. And as usual, guys, I'm Andrew with Holistic Motion. So until next time, see you later. What a guest, huh, guys? Please go comment on their Instagram and let them know that you saw them here. And while you're just doing things that I ask you to, make sure to click this top video that I have linked. That is the last episode of the podcast, which I guarantee will add 10 pounds of muscle to your body. I'll see you there. Later.